when a young Mennonite woman was found dead in Arizona.
He has a gun.
He has it?
He has it. Let's go.
The police were desperate to discover why someone would take her several hours away from her home in New Mexico, only to shoot her dead and dump her body.
Go.
Sheriff's office, get out of the car!
Get on the car.
Turn off the car! Step out now!
Little did they know that as they worked with the Mennonite community to solve this terrible crime, authorities would end up discovering a decade's worth of unsolved crimes, all leading back to one depraved man.
Get your hands up! Step away from the car!
On February 22, 2020, Cynthia Schultz was pleasantly spending her morning collecting firewood for her camp at the Sunset Crater National Park, around 20 miles from Flagstaff, Arizona. While out, Cynthia spotted a woman lying face down in the dirt. Thinking something might be wrong, she called out to the woman. However, when she didn't respond, Cynthia had a horrifying revelation. The woman was dead. Cynthia alerted the authorities, and soon the area was swarmed with police, trying to get to the bottom of this tragedy.
He didn't move or nothing. They went and checked her, and okay. Rigid is a rigor mortis. She was real stiff, cold.
It was immediately clear to the detectives that this case was a homicide, as the victim had a gunshot wound to the head and her hands were bound together with duct tape. As they inspected the body closer, they noticed that the victim was wearing very modest and traditional clothes, which made them suspect she might be a Mennonite. Mennonites are a Christian denomination that practice a conservative lifestyle, dedicating themselves to their religion and only using technology that's strictly necessary, such as basic phones. Through forensic comparisons, the police were able to identify the mysterious victim as 27-year-old Sasha Kraus, a Mennonite woman who had gone missing from New Mexico on January 18th, over a month before she was discovered. While police may have finally been able to give their victim a name, it was now time to uncover her horrific story and find out the truth about how she ended up murdered in a national park nearly 300 miles from her home. Through interviews and investigation, the police were able to determine that Sasha was a Sunday school teacher who had worked and lived on the Lamp and Light compound, a Mennonite community in Farmington, New Mexico. On the night of her disappearance, Sasha was making a quick late-night stop by the Sunday school to finish an errand. When she failed to come home that night, Sasha's roommates alerted the community and the police were soon involved. Unfortunately, the case had hit a dead end fairly soon after beginning, and it seemed like Sasha had simply vanished into thin air. However, not only did authorities now have Sasha's body, they were also able to recover her phone, a key piece of evidence that could likely point them in the direction of their killer. Through phone records, the police were able to deduce that Sasha hadn't just vanished. She'd been kidnapped. As her kidnapper drove her to Arizona, Sasha's phone could be seen pinging off of select phone towers before it died. Throughout her entire trip to Arizona, there was only one other device pinging off of those same towers, and it belonged to a man named Mark Gooch. Mark Gooch was an airman working at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, and at first glance it appeared he had nothing in common with Sasha outside of his cell phone records. Nevertheless, Lauren Nagel, the lead detective on the case, traveled to Luke Air Force Base and sat down with Mark for questioning. Detective Nagel introduces herself as Detective Jones, as she got married at some point between this interview and her appearance in court.
Hi, thank you for your patience. That would work out that way. I asked you to come talk with me, and then, obviously, I get a phone call, right? Alright, so, I'm Detective Jones. I'm with the Sheriff's Office. I'm sure you're wondering what I want to chat with you about. Of course, I'm about to fill you in. We just gotta go through some procedural stuff first.
The interview takes place in an interrogation room on Luke Air Force Base and is an ideal setup according to the Reed technique, a popular method of interrogation. There's no barrier between Detective Nagel and Mark, allowing her to observe all of his movements and nonverbal communication. The walls appear to be bare, which is intentional to minimize distractions. It's also helpful that there's only one detective present, which can make the interview feel less threatening. Additionally, Mark is seated near the door, which helps send the message that he's able to leave at any time. This may make him less defensive and more likely to talk. It can also help prevent any false imprisonment claims later. Detective Nagel and Mark speak briefly about his responsibilities as a mechanic in the Air Force before the detective asks about Mark's life back home.
So what'd you do before Air Force then?
I worked in the diesel mechanic shop for about a year and did construction as well and grew up on a dairy farm. So.
Oh yeah? That's pretty cool. Do you have siblings?
Yes, ma'am. 6.
Oh wow, really?
Yep.
Okay, big family. Yeah. Tell me about them, like how many brothers, sisters?
3 brothers and 3 sisters.
Okay, got it. And where are they at now?
All over the country.
All over?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you the youngest?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Who would you say you're closest with?
I don't know, we kind of got separated pretty good after everybody started moving out.
So you're not close with any of them though?
I talk with them on the phone here and there, but I'm probably closest, maybe my brother back in Wisconsin.
Oh, gotcha. Which brother's that?
It's Sam.
Sam. Okay.
Mark comes across as a polite, well-mannered airman, but as we'll see over the course of the interview, this is just a facade.
So what do you do on your time off?
Play on my computer sometimes, play some games, go hiking as much as possible, but work on my car and bike a lot too. Try to stay active.
Cool. Do you like go to church or anything like that?
No, man, the church closed down.
Oh, that's closed too?
Coronavirus.
Got you. Is that something that you did before it closed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I would attend church quite a bit.
Okay. If you don't mind me asking about that, what kind of religion did you grow up in?
We grew up in a Christian, I guess the religion, I guess is how you call it, but Christianity is how I was raised.
Oh, okay. Any like specific denomination of Christianity?
Mainly they were called Mennonites, or Amish. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that.
Not really. Tell me about that.
But basically drive darker colored vehicles. We use flip phones when you have internet, stuff like that. So it was pretty sheltered, you could say.
Pretty sheltered.
Difficult.
I got it.
With this admission, the police now have another unexpected link between Mark and Sasha. They're both Mennonites. When the detective brings up the topic of religion, Mark starts to fumble with his words, indicating that the topic of religion may be something Mark doesn't want to talk about.
In that last 6 months, have you traveled out of state anywhere?
Yes, ma'am. When I came down here, I drove my car from Wisconsin down here.
Oh, okay. So you drove from Wisconsin to Phoenix?
Correct.
Anywhere else?
Pretty much state of Arizona. I try to do as much hiking as possible.
Mark doesn't know it yet, but he's just been caught in his first lie, the first of many. Using words like pretty much, mostly, and similar sentiments are qualifiers and often throw up a red flag to detectives. These words usually indicate half-truths or that there's something the individual may not wish to disclose. In this case, Mark saying that he pretty much stays in Arizona isn't true at all, and he's hiding something very big. He also uses filler sounds such as to delay answering so he has time to think about his response.
You're probably wondering, why I'm here. So I'm a detective. I'm with Coconino County Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
And I am working a homicide investigation.
Okay.
There was a girl named Sasha Krause that was killed. Did you hear about that case?
I've seen it in the news. Yes, ma'am.
Tell me what you know about the case.
It's basically the news report. She was from New Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she left home one evening, and they found her in northern Arizona, like Flagstaff area, correct?
Right. So that's the case that I'm working. Any idea now why I'd want to talk to you at all?
Probably because I was probably traveling up in New Mexico area, probably.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
As the detective reveals why she's here interviewing him, Mark begins to show more and more signs that he may be hiding something. When asked what he knows about Sasha Krause's murder, Mark vaguely says that they found her. This is a soft way to describe something as violent as a homicide.
And they found her in northern Arizona.
When suspects shy away from using realistic words such as murdered or killed, this can be a red flag for possible deception as they're minimizing the crime. Additionally, Mark uses the qualifier probably 3 times in 8 seconds.
Probably because I was probably traveling up in New Mexico area, probably.
So we've got these things called license plate readers,
Okay.
and your vehicle hit a license plate reader in that area. So tell me about that. You were traveling then. I'm a little confused because at first you said you hadn't traveled, but now did you go to New Mexico?
Yes, ma'am.
Your vehicle was picked up on that license plate reader in the general area on the same day actually that she went missing. And so what I'm doing at this point is I got to talk to everybody, as you can imagine. That's my job. Anybody who's in the area, anybody who could have seen something.
Despite the fact that Mark appears to be intentionally lying, Detective Nagel does a great job of calling him out for it while also remaining non-judgmental. She does this in order to keep Mark from feeling threatened and ending the interview, while also not letting him get comfortable in any of the lies he tells. The more someone repeats a lie, the more confident they will become. She also keeps him calm by not telling him the whole truth about why she's there. Although she's telling Mark that she's just interviewing everyone who got picked up on a certain license plate reader, we know that Mark is actually her #1 suspect, and that he was found through phone records. This is just one example of the ways detectives can lie during interviews in order to get a suspect to tell them the truth.
So why were you in New Mexico that day?
I was planning on going, so I was checking out Mennonite churches. I had traveled up to Flagstaff.
Mark takes a big pause after he says he traveled, followed by his foot twitching, and then he says to Flagstaff.
I had traveled up to Flagstaff.
This is something called a cadence switch, which is essentially a disruption in the flow and inflection of speech. In an interrogation, this can be seen as an indication of something being left out of a story, as the speaker paused and changed their speech pattern.
I was hoping that ski resort was still open.
Yeah.
They were closed due to coronavirus starting up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured I'd go check out a Mennonite church up in that area. So I knew some people from Wisconsin that used to live there.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go just attend because I've really been missing that social life.
Yeah.
I used to have at Mennonite churches.
Is there any reason why you didn't tell me when I asked you if you've traveled? You didn't mention that to me. Is there a reason that you didn't?
No, man, I'm sorry. My memory just, I don't know. It's not what it used to be. I'm tired today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I failed to mention that, but
Okay.
I was not trying to hide or withhold information.
Okay, thanks.
Once again, Mark is caught in a lie. While explaining why he was in New Mexico, he mentions that he was wanting to go skiing. However, the ski resort he drove to, the Arizona Snow Bowl Ski Resort in Flagstaff, was closed due to COVID-19 restrictions. In actuality, the Snow Bowl didn't close for COVID until March, well after Mark would have been there on January 18th. As he says this, he half shrugs with his right shoulder. It's barely perceptible, but lines up when he says, "I don't know." Internally, he does know, and is just making excuses, but he's not confident in his memory excuse. Mark is also sitting with his leg crossed in a way that creates a barrier between himself and the detective. He switched to this guarded position after he was asked about traveling. When questioned about why he didn't mention this trip earlier, Mark's military formality helps him appear more truthful than he's actually being. He refers to Detective Nagel as ma'am and immediately apologizes for not mentioning the trip because he was tired. Unfortunately for Mark, no matter how polite he is, this omission is definitely a sign that he has a reason to keep this trip a secret, and the detective has certainly picked up on that.
Do you remember that day then when you went to New Mexico?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I remember some of it.
So what time about did you leave here, Luke Air Force Base?
Probably left fairly early in the morning.
Okay.
And then what time did you say I was in the area?
I'd have to go grab I've got like the charts, the paper.
Okay.
What time? Well, let's go through the day. So when you say fairly early, what does that mean to you?
Probably about 7.
Okay.
7 is when I left to head up there.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped in Flagstaff for a while. Just got some, got some fuel, I believe.
This is one of the last fully truthful statements Mark says while recounting his trip to New Mexico. While he may think he's being sneaky with his lies, Detective Nagel knows a lot more than she's letting on, and is ready to catch every lie Mark throws her way.
Did you go anywhere else while you're in Flagstaff?
Nope, no, not on the way up. Yeah, pretty much straight driving. Had a really pretty snow-capped mountain up there.
Yeah.
At that time.
So you stopped in Flagstaff, you got gas, and then you think that you drove directly to the church in Farmington?
I stopped in Farmington to get some fuel.
Watch how the detective suddenly starts kicking her foot. Since this discussion is about the scene of the crime, she likely feels a lot of pressure with these questions, trying to make sure she gets his story, and also has what she needs to confront him later. With all of his deceptive behavior already, she's likely fairly certain that he is the person she's looking for, and these are really the high-stakes questions.
About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I had swung by the church just to check their sign and see what time their services was, and they were, let me think, I think it was just Sunday evening.
At this point in the investigation, Detective Nagel has spent a lot of time at Sasha's church, looking for any sign of what happened to her on January 18th. In her entire time there, the detective has never seen any sign even somewhat similar to the one Mark is claiming to have checked.
Did you, talk to anybody while you were there?
No, there was no one at the church, and I didn't want to bother anybody, so.
Did you like it? I don't know, what is it a church that, like what you grew up in, or different?
It looked fairly similar, but it's not really the same, so I'm a little disappointed with the whole long drive and everything. I didn't really see it as working out long term to make it there.
Yeah, that is a long drive.
It'd be way too far to drive every weekend, so I talked to my friend. He wanted to go hiking on Sunday, and I really wanted to make it for that. I work with him in the shop. And
who's that friend?
His name's Kefley.
Mark claims that he made plans with Kefley to go hiking the following day. However, according to Kefley himself, the two actually went to a swap meet, also known as a flea market.
From what I'm understanding, it doesn't sound like you were there for very long.
No, man.
And then where did you go after that?
I'm trying to remember if I was going to go look for a hike, or did I head straight back? I think I started, once he called me about the hike on Sunday, I think I started heading back.
He called you?
Correct.
While you were over there?
Correct.
Okay.
According to Mark, Kefley called him to discuss plans. However, the phone records disagree with Mark. Mark and Kefley only texted that day, and in fact, the only person that Mark spoke to on the phone was his brother Sam. Not only did Mark and Sam call, but they actually called each other 6 times, for a total of nearly 2.5 hours, which is longer than the two had talked on the phone for the last 6 months combined.
On the way back home, did you stop anywhere?
I don't know, I might have made it to Phoenix on a full tank, I don't know. I'd have to check.
Okay. So am I understanding correctly, you don't remember stopping anywhere?
No, ma'am.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you remember what time you got back here to home?
It was fairly late. It was probably 8 or 9 o'clock. So I got back.
Long day, man.
Yep.
Mark makes a lot of lip and mouth movements here, known as micro-expressions. One of the biggest indicators of deception and hiding something is a movement called disappearing lips, which Mark demonstrates. Once again, Mark's account of the trip contradicts his phone records. While he might say that he went straight home from New Mexico, the records actually show him stopping in Sunset Crater National Park for several hours. With Mark having officially told his story about where he was on the day of Sasha's murder, Detective Nagel is noticing more and more red flags. Mark consistently lies, hesitates, and supposedly struggles to recall information when he is asked about stops he made, times, and what he was doing at specific points throughout his trip. When a suspect has a memory of extremes, meaning their memory is either too good or too bad, this is seen as a red flag to detectives. Just over 2 months have passed since January 18th, so it doesn't make sense that Mark is struggling so much to recall basic information about his trip. Given that this trip was pretty out of the ordinary for him, the trip should actually stick out in his mind even more.
What do you think should happen to the person that did that to Sasha?
As far as Like, what are you getting at there?
But if we caught the person who killed her, what should happen to them?
Well, you should probably let the law deal with it. Or maybe the Mennonite community has a way of doing things differently.
In the Reed technique, this line of questioning is known as the punishment question, and it can be a good indicator of deception. Individuals who give vague answers are more likely to be deceptive than those who answer with strong, definitive punishments. Mark pauses for an incredibly long time after being asked what he thinks should happen to Sasha's killer, and he eventually settles on, "I don't know." This is the exact type of vague answer that sets off alarm bells for detectives when it comes to the punishment question. After a few more questions, Detective Nagel tells Mark that she's going to step out for just a few minutes to review her notes. After letting Mark stew for 10 minutes, Detective Nagel comes back in and gets ready to really take Mark's story apart and figure out what exactly it is that he's lying about.
On the way back, what time did you come back through the gate?
It was dark, possibly 8 or 9. Probably later than that, I'm not sure.
So what's like a reasonable time frame? So like you're saying around 8 or 9, like what's the latest you think you possibly came through that gate?
Probably could have been 1 or 2. 8 or 9 to 1 or 2 is probably the most time frame that I can think of.
Okay.
It was dark when I came through.
It's kind of a big time frame there, though.
I understand.
8 p.m. to 2 a.m. is pretty different.
I understand.
Okay. So you want to stick with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Now that Detective Nagel has informed Mark his story doesn't add up, it's likely that he's going to respond with even less specifics than he was before, hence his 6-hour time span. If Mark is adamant that he got home at 8 p.m., but then video footage shows otherwise, it will reflect badly on his credibility. On the other hand, if he admits that it was 2 a.m. when he got home, then there's a large chunk of time that's completely unaccounted for between Mark leaving the church and arriving home. While Mark might be trying to avoid getting caught in a lie by avoiding specifics, in actuality, this just makes him even more suspicious.
So what if I told you that the time that you came in the gate that morning was 6:53 in the morning?
Would not guess it was that late.
That's a long time.
Yes, ma'am.
So how do you explain that?
I stopped and slept in the car. On the way back, I had trouble staying awake. Tried to stop and sleep multiple times, but that's... Couldn't really sleep. It was cold.
Okay.
On the drive back.
Okay.
Now, Mark has to scramble to fill in the gaps that Detective Nagel is pointing out. Mark claimed he left at 7 in the morning on January 18th, and according to the detective's records, he didn't get home until nearly that same time the following morning. Not only is this around 10 hours after the original time Mark gave for when he got home, but it's almost 5 hours after the revised time he gave. It's also highly suspicious that he has never mentioned this supposed nap he took in his car on the way home. And it definitely comes across that Mark is doing anything he can to try and cover up his lies.
Have you gone to Flagstaff any more than that one time?
No, ma'am. Except when I came down from Wisconsin to Duluth. I don't remember which route I took coming in.
Okay. So after this New Mexico trip, you have not gone back up to Flagstaff again, is that right?
Not to my knowledge.
Mark saying not to my knowledge doesn't make sense here, because how could he travel somewhere without his knowledge? This is a selective memory statement, but in this situation, it also just doesn't even fit with the statement, and he would have been better off going with "I'm not sure," or "I don't think so," or some other selective memory statement. He must be starting to really feel some anxiety about this, because his thought processes are less logical and his word choices aren't great.
So I know that you went back up to Flagstaff a couple days later.
Okay.
And I've got a couple different ways to confirm that, like your gate checkouts and evidence that you were up in Flagstaff. So did you go back to Flagstaff for some reason a couple days later?
Possibly went for a drive. Went to go. I don't remember.
When asked about going to Flagstaff again, Mark hesitates for a long time before answering. Significant delays can be a red flag for deception. Some questions require thought, so it would make sense for someone to stop and think before answering. However, it doesn't take this much thought to remember if you recently went to a town 2 hours away from where you live, meaning that Mark's hesitation just comes off as suspicious. Clearly, Mark isn't going to be truthful about what he was really up to on January 18th. So Detective Nagel changes gears and starts asking Mark more about his Mennonite connection to Sasha.
Earlier when we were talking, you mentioned how when you're not born into the Mennonite church, we use that word outsider. Like you're kind of an outsider compared to like people who are born in. Sasha was like that too. Did you know that? Her family was not born into Mennonite church. So I'm wondering if you're willing to kind of tell me. I noticed I just saw a little bit of an emotion in you when we talked about that. Is there something that happened to you in the Mennonite church that upsets you?
Not really. It's just the way of life, and I didn't really like it, and I was happy to be out of it. My parents left the church.
By stating not really, he's denying anything happened to him, but not strongly. By using a qualifying statement instead of just saying no, it suggests that there is something, but he doesn't want to talk about it.
Okay. So Mark, what I do for a living is talk to people.
Understood.
And I just feel like I can read people a little. I know I don't know you. I'm not going to even pretend I do. But there's something there. And is it just something you don't want to talk about? Something that happened that made you leave the church?
No, ma'am. I pretty much left the church when my parents decided to leave.
Okay.
Mark uses another qualifier, but what is more interesting are his lip movements. It seems like his lip movements are his fidgeting behaviors, but he's probably had some training about not showing anxiety both in the home he grew up in, as well as in the military, so he doesn't have a lot of the bigger nonverbal cues that we look for. Yet these lip movements, which continue to return to the disappearing lips, make it clear that he's withholding information. It's almost like he's trying to hold in whatever it is he really wants to say. While Mark may be playing it cool, the detective knows he's hiding something. Before this interview even began, Detective Nagel was able to go through Mark's text messages and saw some concerning things regarding his views on Mennonites. In a text conversation, Mark and Sam are told by their brother Jacob, a Virginia state trooper, that he had just given 2 Mennonites a speeding ticket. Mark and Sam are both overjoyed to hear this, and Mark even says that he hopes that Jacob treated the Mennonites like shit. Sam makes a point of calling the Mennonites cultists, giving some insight into how he and his brothers feel about the religion. In another conversation between just Mark and Sam, Mark tells Sam that his surveillance on the Arizona Mennonites that morning was boring. The use of the word surveillance was incredibly alarming to authorities, and clued them into the fact that he may have been planning some kind of attack on the community for quite a while.
We have a detective talking to Sam right now.
Okay.
In Wisconsin. Okay? And so I want you to know that for this main reason. Sam's telling us some stuff, and you're talking to me, and I want to just make sure, what both of you guys are telling us lines up. And
sure.
what I know a little bit about from what Sam said sounds like something's going on here as far as like maybe you have hard feelings against the Mennonite church, or maybe like a grudge or something like that.
So let me get this straight. You're talking with Sam right now, huh? Mm-hmm. So it sounds like I need to get a lawyer because you're trying to pin something on me.
Well, I read you your rights at the beginning of this.
Yes, ma'am. And I'd like to see a lawyer now.
You would like to speak with the lawyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm not going to ask you any more questions then. I am going to have you sit here for a few minutes.
Understood.
And then I'm going to kind of explain to you what else is going on today, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You go with that water?
Correct.
All right.
Detective Nagel is using a bit of the prisoner's dilemma technique, pinning one suspect against the other. We see him do a big anchor point movement immediately after, and his illustrators don't line up with his words. As soon as the detective leaves the room, Mark unbarriers his legs. Detective Nagel's comments clearly struck a nerve with Mark, and for the first time, we see him change his reaction and become stern. He clearly doesn't like that his brother is also being interviewed. Perhaps Mark has good reason to fear that Sam will say too much to the cops, as while Sam refused to answer the majority of questions during his brief interview, he did say one thing that caught detectives' attention. Not only did Sam claim that Mark had a grudge against Mennonites, but when asked if he knew why the cops were questioning him, Sam ominously replied no, but that he knew his brother and how he is, giving police even more reason to be suspicious of Mark. With his interview concluded, Mark was served several search warrants for his phone, apartment, and car, all of which proved to be very enlightening to the authorities. The first thing investigators noticed when looking at Mark's car was how spotless it was. Upon further inspection, they were able to recover a receipt that showed Mark had gotten his car heavily detailed on February 23rd, the day after it was announced to the public that Sasha's body had been found. Additionally, the police also discovered some black nitrile gloves in the car, alongside some suspicious stains. Now that detectives are finally able to scour Mark's phone, more inconsistencies begin to pop up. According to his deletion records, Mark had deleted several files and documents from his Google account early in the morning of January 19th, after returning home from his New Mexico trip. He also deleted several texts with Sam where he discussed getting his car detailed, stating that he wanted the detailers to clean the interior really well. With several concerning, if somewhat circumstantial things found in Mark's phone and car, they had enough to detain him. However, police still didn't have enough evidence to actually connect Mark to Sasha's killing, never mind justify an arrest and guarantee a conviction. There was still the puzzling question of why, as there was no clear motive why Mark would have killed Sasha. Investigators soon began interviewing and interrogating the people closest to him in the hopes that they could shed some light on the case. First, they started with Alex Golub, Mark's good friend from basic training. For the most part, Alex said that Mark seemed completely normal throughout their friendship. However, there was one odd moment Alex mentioned that really stuck out to detectives.
Has Mark ever talked about killing people to you?
No, ma'am. Just the text that we did have. We were going to go spec ops together, and we were kind of looking at TAC B. And he mentioned in one of the texts that something like he'd be happy to get paid for killing people. Yeah, exactly. But I was just like, oh, I mean, that's kind of like a Gooch thing. It's just a weird thing to say. So I was like, oh, that's just Gooch. And also, you know, it's the enemy. So I mean, I don't really take it as like he's wanting to kill innocents. It's more like the enemy. Okay. These are exactly what you're referring to, probably. See that the highlighted conversation between you guys? Yes, ma'am. Is that what you were just talking about? Let's go TAC B together. Yes, ma'am. Do you have the one where it says he? Yes. Where it says I would like to get paid to kill people. Right. And I don't have the next page, but from what I recall of that conversation, you didn't say, "Whoa, man, that's weird," or you guys kind of just went on. I think I just typed his name in all caps because that's what I would always say. Okay. If he said something just like strange.
While Alex laughed off Mark's comment, there's no denying that it's concerning. This text from Mark implies that he may have been harboring these sorts of morbid desires long before targeting Sasha.
It was about respect too. Like one guy in our sister class, he had his feet up on the desk one day, and Gooch was like, "Oh, you should probably get your feet off the desk." Mm-hmm. And the other dude made a snarky comment like, "Oh, you're telling me what to do," kind of thing now. Yeah. And I could tell that Gooch got pretty mad at that. I was like, calm down. Okay.
From Alex's story about Mark, we can see some indications that Mark may struggle with anger control. The story is also indicative of excessive rigidity. People who are very rigid when it comes to social rules may often get into confrontations with others because they can't cope with seeing any rule-breaking behaviors they deem inappropriate. While this might seem contradictory at first, given the accusations against Mark, he may feel that the rules don't apply to him. This is a trait typically found in individuals with antisocial personality disorder.
How do you remember Mark reacting to stress?
Just stiff as a board, very disciplined. Never screamed back, never lost his cool kind of thing. Okay. You'd see his face get red, but I thought he was just embarrassed.
Alex describes Mark as stiff as a board and mentions his face turning red. These traits, in conjunction with how we saw Mark acting during his interview, could be signs that he's emotionally cut off. This is another trait that's common among individuals with antisocial personality disorder and is tied to their overall lack of empathy. While these few indicators certainly aren't enough to give Mark a full diagnosis, they can give us some insight into how he might think. As investigators questioned those around Mark, they learned something very interesting that could blow this case wide open. According to Kemper Kepley, Mark's best friend at Luke Air Force Base, Mark had secretly kept a gun on base for several months. However, he'd recently given the gun to another friend to store off base. Detectives were quick to track this gun down and bring it in for testing, which showed that it was the same caliber as the bullet that killed Sasha. However, while the police were in possession of Mark's gun, the case took a turn none of the investigators were expecting.
I got a text just a few minutes ago from Sam Gooch that said Mark Gooch had said that I could help him out with his possessions.
The detective is fine with Kemper working with Sam to get some of Mark's belongings. However, he does have one request.
He starts asking about the gun. That's what we want to know about.
Right.
And,
okay.
And don't, provide him any information that you know about the gun. If you can help that. So, we're asking you not to do that.
Within a week of this call with Kemper, detectives were notified that Sam had reached out to Jeremiah Levesque, the last person who had Mark's gun before it was given to the police. While working with Jeremiah, the police listened in on a phone call between him and Sam, where Sam made plans to travel across state lines to Arizona in order to dispose of Mark's gun before the police could get it. In the call, Sam told Jeremiah, "Considering what's going on, if you're comfortable, I would say get rid of the gun any way you deem fit. If not, I will deal with it whenever I get there." Jeremiah was then able to arrange a meetup point with Sam where they planned to trade Mark's gun. However, unbeknownst to Sam, Jeremiah had been given a replica gun by the police, and officers were going to be covertly hidden around the meetup site, waiting to make their arrest.
Target just pulled into the second parking spot.
Yeah, no problem. There you go, sir.
Hey, move.
That's good. Hey, call it in.
I can't. My phone. Where's your phone? Shit. Target's getting back in his car.
He's got the gun.
Target has a gun.
He has it?
He has it. Let's go. Go.
Sheriff's office, get out of the car!
Get on the car.
Turn off the car! Step out now! Get your hands up! Step away from the car! Step towards me! Turn away from me now! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Put your hands behind your head! Passenger, get out of the car! Passenger, in the back, get out of the car!
With their sting operation successful and Sam Gooch arrested, it was time for the detectives to find out why Sam was so set on disposing of Mark's gun. Detective Troy Short was sent in to interrogate Sam, and he was immediately met with resistance.
You want to start from the beginning and
I believe you think I know more than I do, and
so explain me what that means. You know what I mean? If I know more than you do, help me understand that.
I don't think this is going to be a productive conversation for me, and
Do you want to tell me about tonight?
No, sir.
Okay. If you want to tell me why you guys came halfway across the country to pick up a gun?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you understand why you're here in the room?
Yes, sir.
Here's the deal, Sam. A part of me even feels bad right now because, like I told you back in Wisconsin, you weren't a focus. You weren't a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because of some bad choices, you're in some serious trouble. Not as serious as Mark by any means. You know what I mean? He's in some serious trouble, and I tried to explain that to you back there. Is there anything you can do to help yourself right now, or help yourself out of this mess, or?
As much as I would like to, I frankly do not believe you have my best interest in mind.
Okay.
And I do not think discussing this with you would be helpful.
While Sam may be refusing to give the detective the answers he's looking for, he has yet to actually invoke his Miranda rights. Whether or not Sam knows this, refusing to answer a line of questioning is not enough to stop an interrogation and get a lawyer. We can see that Sam is being very cautious in how he responds to Detective Short. When he pauses to take a sip of water after being asked a question, it's likely that he was doing this as a stalling tactic to allow himself time to carefully pick his words. Sam appears to have some prior knowledge about interrogations, as he is correct that the detective doesn't have the suspect's best interests in mind. He appears reluctant to speak as he likely doesn't want to incriminate himself or his brother further by saying the wrong thing.
Why did he call you for this extended period of time on that specific day? Specifically the day that he's under arrest for murder. You know what I mean? Extensive amount of phone calls that day. For elaborate amount of time. Completely outside the norm of you guys' normal communication process. Why are you in Arizona? Why did you fly halfway across the country? Why did you obtain a new phone with a new phone number to do this? Why are you here picking up a gun that you know belongs to Mark? If you don't know what he did, then why would you do that?
We know what he allegedly did.
Okay, I understand that. So you know he allegedly murdered somebody?
Correct.
Okay, so why are you picking up a gun that belonged to him? Specifically, when I told you, when I interviewed you back in Wisconsin, do you know Mark has any guns? And you were like, nope. I don't think he's allowed to have one on base. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
So what's the deal?
I would like to collect all of Mark's possessions as possible. If that gun is his possession, I would like to collect that as well.
Sam refuses to tell the detective why he tried to dispose of Mark's gun, but there are a few possible explanations. Mark claimed that Sam was his closest brother. It's possible that he called Sam and used their close relationship to convince Sam he had to get rid of the gun. Not because Mark killed someone, but because police thought he did. It's more than evident that Sam has a distrust of law enforcement, so it would make sense for Mark to prey upon this feeling in order to persuade his brother that if Sam didn't dispose of this weapon, the police were going to frame Mark for something he didn't do.
It's attempted destruction of evidence, attempted tampering with evidence, attempted hindering prosecution. I mean, there's 2 felonies in there. Like, this is a big deal. So do you want to help me understand it? Do you want to explain it to me? Do you want to...
I don't think so. What is next in this process?
The next part is you go down to jail.
Okay. The way I see it, talking and discussing this with you, you will only use it against me to make these charges stick, and to further incriminate Mark.
Since Sam clearly understands how his words could be used against him, it's odd that he's still agreeing to sit here rather than asking for an attorney or outright refusing to respond. It's possible that his curiosity got the better of him, and he wants to find out how much the detectives know about Mark's crime. It's also possible that Sam is afraid and feels that if he at least agrees to sit in the interrogation room, he may be able to dodge the consequences of having helped Mark. With Sam's interview at a stalemate, the detectives are forced to look elsewhere for information. Throughout their entire investigation, the one thing they haven't been able to deduce clearly is motive. Was this just a random killing? Or was there something more at play here? While it's clear that Mark had some sort of grudge against Mennonites, it made no sense that someone with no prior criminal history would suddenly plan an elaborate murder 6 hours away from their home and target someone they'd never even heard of before. At least that's what Detective Nagel thought until she spoke with some Mennonites from Wisconsin and discovered that Mark's past wasn't quite as clean as it seemed. In a phone interview with Mark's former pastor, James Luke Martin, Detective Nagel learned that no one at Mark's former church was surprised to learn that he'd now been arrested in connection with such a heinous crime, as Mark had a reputation for taking revenge on others. Mark had also allegedly been involved in several robberies at the church. When the church tried to punish him for his involvement, his parents stepped in and decided to leave the church for being too critical of Mark. However, this was not the end of Mark's criminal activities. While living with his sister in Pennsylvania, Mark was accused of stealing money from the local Mennonites. Soon after, everyone who accused Mark of stealing money discovered that their cars suspiciously stopped working. After investigating further, these Mennonites found that sand had been placed into the oil pans of their cars, causing their engines to stop working. While those affected weren't able to prove it was Mark who put the sand there, it doesn't seem like a coincidence given his interest in mechanics and apparent taste for revenge. Detective Nagel then spoke to Jonathan Martin, the son of Mark's pastor, who provided further examples of Mark getting caught stealing. Jonathan even said that when he was angry, Mark would prowl around the Mennonite community to see what he could find. After speaking with Jonathan's son, Detective Nagel learned that Mark had allegedly robbed the Martins' family store. However, charges were never pressed due to the fact that the store security camera had its memory card stolen, so there was never visual proof of Mark being the one who robbed the store. While there may not have been any evidence of Mark's involvement at the time of the robbery, Detective Nagel was able to actually find the security footage from that robbery on Mark's own phone, and it showed a man with Mark's height and build robbing the store. In one of the photos, a car that looked suspiciously like Mark's could be seen in the background. With these photos, Detective Nagel had what appeared to be tangible proof that these accusations against Mark weren't just hearsay. Eventually, the detective got a hold of Jared Ulrich, a man who claimed to be Mark's partner in crime in the past. Jared openly confessed to Detective Nagel about all the robberies he'd allegedly committed with Mark, and he described in detail how Mark would try to frame other people in the community for their crimes. There definitely seemed to be evidence that Jared may have been telling the truth, as a series of texts were found on Mark's phone, all of which had been recently deleted. In these texts, Mark talked to Sam about Jared never understanding the real cost of getting caught. Mark then asked Sam to remotely wipe Jared's phone, something that he also asked Sam to do to his own phone after he fell under suspicion for Sasha's murder. While all of this information against Mark was damning enough, there was still one more disturbing truth to learn. Through many more interviews, Detective Nagel was eventually put in contact with Andrew and Galen Headings, a pair of brothers who were close with Mark during his time in Wisconsin. Andrew recounted a time where he had confronted Mark for stealing, and during their conversation, Mark was so cold and bitter that Andrew said he feared for his life. Galen had an even more disturbing revelation for Detective Nagel, as he told her about Mark's alleged inappropriate actions towards women. According to Galen, Mark confessed to him that he had allegedly assaulted a young girl his sister was babysitting when he was around 10 to 13 years old. However, this claim has never been publicly proven, and there's no evidence of it being true. Still, with this information, it became clear that Mark always had the capacity to harm others, and allegedly had many times in the past. Mark's motive in harming Sasha was also more evident than ever. All the unfounded anger and resentment he had towards the Mennonite community had been steadily growing over the years, and as it did, Mark took his revenge against them further and further. Up to this point, charges had never been pressed against Mark, and he felt like he could outsmart anyone, even the police. With this misplaced confidence, Mark decided to see if he could get away with the ultimate crime, murder. It appears that Mark had gone to the Mennonite community that day in search of a victim, and tragically, Sasha was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mark grabbed her from her car late at night and no one saw a thing. Still, that didn't prevent him from getting caught. Unfortunately for him, while no one had previously pressed any charges for his theft, the state of Arizona was more than happy to charge Mark for Sasha's murder and put him on trial. Mark's trial began on September 24, 2021. In January of 2022, the jury found Mark guilty on charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder, earning him a life sentence. For his help in covering up Mark's crimes, Sam Gooch pleaded guilty and received 3 years probation. With both Sam and Mark dealt with, Sasha Krause and her family finally received the justice they deserve.
The Shadow in the Desert, an in-depth analysis of the Mark Gooch case. Part 1. A Silence in the Community. The world of the Lamp and Light Mennonite community in Farmington, New Mexico, is one defined by quiet devotion and deliberate separation. Life moves to the rhythm of faith, tradition, and hard work. It is a world of simple dress, shared purpose, and technology used only out of necessity, not for entertainment. In this tranquil and ordered existence, Sasha Krause, 27, had found her place. She was a Sunday school teacher, known for her gentle spirit and dedication to the children she taught. Her life, like the community around her, was one of predictable, peaceful routines. That peace was irrevocably shattered on the night of January 18th, 2020. The evening was cold and clear, typical for a New Mexico winter. Sasha had an errand to run, a simple, mundane task. She needed to pick up some materials from the Sunday school building for a lesson. It was a short trip, one she had made countless times before. She left the communal living quarters, stepped into the crisp night air, and vanished. When she failed to return, a quiet unease began to ripple through the community. This was not like Sasha. She was dependable, responsible. The unease soon curdled into alarm. Her roommates raised the alarm, and soon the entire community was mobilized. They searched the familiar grounds, their calls echoing in the darkness, but the only answer was a profound and terrifying silence. Sasha Kraus, a woman who lived a life deliberately shielded from the dangers of the outside world, had been swallowed by them. The authorities were called, and a formal investigation began, but it quickly hit a wall. There were no witnesses. There was no sign of a struggle. Her car was still at the church. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. For over a month, her family and community lived in a state of suspended agony, praying for her return while fearing the worst. The case grew cold, a painful mystery with no leads and no answers. Part 2. The discovery at Sunset Crater, nearly 300 miles away, in the stark, volcanic landscape near Flagstaff, Arizona. Another day was beginning. On February 22, 2020, a woman named Cynthia Schultz was spending her morning at Sunset Crater National Park, a place known for its otherworldly terrain of ancient lava flows and cinder cones. While collecting firewood for her camp, her eyes caught something out of place against the dark, earthen tones of the landscape. It was a figure, lying face down and motionless in the dirt. Thinking someone might be injured or ill, she called out. The silence that answered her was heavy and absolute. As she moved closer, a horrifying realization dawned. The woman was not sleeping. She was dead. The scene that greeted law enforcement was somber and disturbing. The victim was dressed in the modest, traditional clothing of a Mennonite. Her hands were bound with duct tape. A single, precise gunshot wound to the back of her head told them this was not an accident or a tragedy of the elements. It was a homicide. The body was rigid with rigor mortis, cold to the touch, indicating she had been there for some time. Using forensic comparisons and cross-referencing missing person reports, investigators were soon able to give the victim a name. She was Sasha Kraus, the gentle Sunday school teacher who had disappeared from New Mexico more than a month prior. The mystery of her whereabouts was solved, but it was replaced by a series of even more harrowing questions. Who would do this? And why would they drive her nearly 300 miles from one state to another, only to execute her and leave her body in this desolate place? The key to unlocking the mystery lay in the one piece of modern technology Sasha carried: her basic cell phone. Though its battery had long since died, its digital footprint remained. Part 3. The Digital Ghost and the Airman. In modern homicide investigations, the digital trail of a victim is often as crucial as any physical evidence. Detectives recovered Sasha's phone and began the painstaking process of analyzing its data. They discovered that on the night she vanished, her phone had not simply gone dark. It had traveled. As her abductor drove her west, away from everything she knew, her phone pinged off a sequence of cell towers, creating a ghostly map of her final journey. This was the first major breakthrough. Sasha hadn't run away. She had been taken. As analysts traced this path, they ran a parallel search, looking for any other devices that mirrored the same unusual late-night journey, hitting the same remote towers at the same times. They found one. A single, solitary device shadowed Sasha's path from Farmington to the area near Sunset Crater. That device belonged to a 21-year-old U.S. Air Force airman stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, Mark Gooch. On the surface, Mark Gooch was an unlikely suspect. He was a mechanic in the Air Force, a job that required discipline and technical skill. He had no significant criminal record. He lived a structured life on a military base. There was no apparent connection between him and a Mennonite woman from a different state. Yet, the digital evidence was undeniable. Their paths and their phones had been intertwined during the last hours of Sasha's life. Lauren Nagel, the lead detective on the case, traveled to Luke Air Force Base. It was time to meet the man behind the digital ghost. Part 4. The Anatomy of a Lie. Interrogating Mark Gooch. The interrogation room at Luke Air Force Base was sterile and featureless, a design intended to minimize distractions and maximize psychological pressure. Detective Nagel, introducing herself as Detective Jones, created an environment that was non-confrontational, a key tenet of the Reed technique of interrogation. She sat with no barrier between herself and Mark, allowing for a clear view of his body language. She positioned him near the door, a subtle cue that he was free to leave, intended to lower his defenses. Initially, Mark Gooch presented as the ideal airman, polite, well-mannered, and respectful, addressing the detective as ma'am. He spoke of his work as a mechanic, his large family of 6 siblings, and his upbringing on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. But when Detective Nagel steered the conversation toward his life outside the military, the first cracks in his facade began to appear. The religious connection. Nagel asked if he attended church. Mark mentioned that his church had closed due to the coronavirus, but that he used to attend quite a bit. What kind of religion did you grow up in? Nagel asked. I grew up in a Christian. I guess the religion, is how you call it. Christianity is how I was raised, he stammered. Any specific denomination? Not really. This was a lie, and a significant one. Mark Gooch had grown up Mennonite, the very same faith as the victim. This was a shocking, unexpected link. His fumbling, evasive answer was a clear indicator that his religious background was a topic of discomfort, a subject he desperately wanted to avoid. The lie about travel. Nagel then moved to the crucial question of his whereabouts. In that last 6 months, have you traveled out of state anywhere? Yes, ma'am, he replied. When I came down here, I drove my car from Wisconsin down here. Anywhere else? Pretty much all state of Arizona. I try to do as much hiking as possible. The phrase pretty much is a classic qualifier, a verbal hedge that detectives are trained to recognize. It often signals a half-truth or a deliberate omission. Mark was not being truthful. He was hiding something significant. Nagel, armed with the cell phone data, already knew he had traveled to New Mexico. She pressed him, revealing that she was working the Sasha Krause homicide case. Any idea now why I want to talk to you at all? She asked. Probably because I was, traveling up in my exterior, he said. The word probably appearing 3 times in a few seconds, a clear sign of his lack of confidence in the lie he was constructing. Nagel confronted him gently, explaining that his license plate was picked up in the area where Sasha went missing on the very same day. She framed it as a routine inquiry, a way to find potential witnesses, keeping him talking rather than shutting him down. Caught, Mark was forced to admit the trip. Yes, ma'am, he conceded. Is there any reason why you didn't tell me when I asked you if you've traveled? No, ma'am, sorry. My memory I don't know. It's not what it used to be. I'm tired today, he said, offering a weak and unbelievable excuse. The polite, formal apology was a tool to mask the deliberate deception, constructing a false narrative. Now forced to account for his presence in Farmington, Mark began to weave a new, more elaborate web of lies. The motive for the trip. He claimed he drove to Flagstaff first, hoping to go skiing, but the resort was closed due to coronavirus, a falsehood. The resort didn't close for COVID-19 until March, 2 months later. He then decided, on a whim, to drive several more hours to Farmington to check out a Mennonite church because he missed the social life. The church visit. He claimed he arrived at Sasha's church in the afternoon, saw a sign with service times, and left because no one was around, and he didn't want to bother anyone. He described the church as not really the same as what he was used to and felt disappointed with the whole long drive. Detective Nagel, having spent countless hours at that very church during her investigation, knew no such sign existed. The return journey. Mark claimed his friend Kefley called him about hiking plans for the next day, prompting him to start heading straight back to Arizona. Phone records showed this was also a lie. He and Kefley had only texted. The only person Mark spoke to on the phone that day was his brother, Sam. They spoke 6 times for a combined total of nearly 2.5 hours, a highly unusual amount of communication for them. The timeline. He initially claimed he got back to the base around 8 or 9 p.m. that same night. He made distinct mouth movements when saying this, including disappearing lips, a micro-expression often associated with withholding information. His phone records and the base's gate logs told a very different story. The confrontation and the collapse. After a break, Detective Nagel returned, ready to dismantle his story piece by piece. What if I told you that the time that you came in the gate that morning was 6:53? In the morning, she stated calmly. The nearly 24-hour trip was now exposed. His 8 p.m. arrival was a lie. His revised window of 8 or 9 p.m. or 1 or 2 a.m. was also a lie. The gap in time was immense and unaccounted for. I stopped and slept in the car on the way back, he scrambled, inventing a new detail on the spot. I had trouble staying awake. Can't really sleep. It was cold. This was the first time he had mentioned sleeping in his car, a desperate attempt to fill the gaping hole in his timeline. This hole, of course, was the time he spent at Sunset Crater, where he murdered Sasha and disposed of her body. Nagel continued to apply pressure, revealing she knew he had returned to Flagstaff a few days later, another trip he had forgotten to mention. His composure began to fray. The final phase of the interrogation shifted to his feelings about the Mennonite church. Nagel noted the emotion she saw in him when the topic was broached. "Is there something that happened to you in the Mennonite church that upsets you?" she asked. "Not really," he replied, another qualifying statement that hinted at a deeper truth. He was withholding information, his lip movements becoming more pronounced as if physically trying to hold the words in. The tipping point came when Nagel revealed her trump card. "We have a detective talking to you, brother Sam, right now in Wisconsin," she said. And what I know a little bit about from what Sam said is it sounds like something's going on here as far as maybe you have hard feelings against the Mennonite church. The mention of his brother being simultaneously interrogated shattered Mark's calm demeanor. The polite facade crumbled. "So it sounds like I need to get a lawyer," he said, his tone turning cold and stern. "Because you're trying to pin something on me." He invoked his right to counsel, and the interview was over. But it had served its purpose. Mark Gooch had lied about every single critical aspect of his trip, revealing a consciousness of guilt so profound that it was undeniable. Part 5. A History of Malice. With Mark Gooch detained, investigators executed search warrants on his car, his apartment, and his phone, unearthing a trove of incriminating evidence and painting a picture of a young man with a long-simmering history of resentment and criminality. The physical evidence. The car. Investigators found his vehicle to be immaculately clean. A receipt showed that he had it extensively detailed on February 23rd, the day after Sasha's body was publicly identified. This was a clear attempt to destroy forensic evidence. Despite the cleaning, suspicious stains and black nitrile gloves were found. The phone. His deleted files were a roadmap of his guilt. He had deleted Google account data on the morning of January 19th, immediately after returning from the murder. He had also deleted texts with his brother Sam in which they discussed getting the car's interior cleaned really well. The gun. Investigators learned from Mark's friend, Kemper Kepley, that Mark owned a handgun, which he had recently given to another friend to store off base. Ballistics tests showed it was the same caliber as the bullet used to kill Sasha. Unearthing past crimes. As Detective Nagel dug into Mark's past in Wisconsin, she discovered that his clean record was an illusion. The Mennonite community he had left behind remembered him not as a polite young man, but as a vengeful and dishonest figure. Theft and revenge. His former pastor, James Luke Martin, told Nagel that no one in the community was surprised by Mark's arrest. He had a reputation for stealing and taking revenge. When confronted about robberies at the church, his parents had defended him, pulling their family from the church and blaming them for being too critical. Calculated sabotage. After moving to Pennsylvania, Mark was again accused of stealing from local Mennonites. Shortly after, every single one of his accusers found that their cars had mysteriously broken down. The cause was sand poured into the oil pans, an act of sabotage requiring mechanical knowledge and a cold, vindictive mindset. The undeniable proof. Mark was also the primary suspect in the robbery of the Martin family's store. No charges were filed because the security system's memory card had been stolen. In an incredible twist, investigators found the stolen security footage from that very robbery on Mark's own phone. It showed a man of his exact height and billed robbing the store. Interviews with former associates like Jared Ulrich confirmed this pattern. Jared confessed to committing robberies with Mark, describing how Mark would expertly frame other people for their crimes. The text messages between Mark and Sam about remotely wiping Jared's phone and later Mark's own phone showed a sophisticated understanding of covering his digital tracks. The motive solidifies. The investigation revealed a clear and chilling motive. Mark Gooch harbored a deep-seated, violent grudge against the Mennonite community. This was not a random act of violence. It was the culmination of years of festering anger and resentment. Text messages between Mark and his brothers revealed their shared contempt. When their brother Jacob, a state trooper, mentioned giving 2 Mennonites a speeding ticket, Mark and Sam were overjoyed. Mark texted that he hoped Jacob treated the Mennonites like S. Sam referred to them as cultists. Mark's surveillance of Mennonite communities in Arizona, which he mentioned in a text to Sam, showed that he was actively stalking them. He was hunting. On January 18, 2020, he drove to Farmington with a singular, malevolent purpose: to find a victim who represented the community he so despised. Tragically, Sasha Krause, in the wrong place, at the very worst time, became the target for years of his accumulated hate. He felt he was smarter than them, smarter than the police, and that he could commit the ultimate crime and get away with it. Part 6. A Brother's Complicity. The investigation took another dramatic turn when it became clear that Mark was not acting alone in the cover-up. His brother, Sam Gooch, the one he was closest to, the one he had spent hours on the phone with on the day of the murder, became an active accomplice. After Mark's arrest, Sam began coordinating with Mark's friends in Arizona. He contacted Jeremiah Levesque, the man holding Mark's gun, and made plans to travel from Wisconsin to Arizona with one goal: to get the gun and dispose of it before the police could perform ballistic tests. In a recorded call, Sam told Jeremiah, "Considering what's going on, if you're comfortable, I would say get rid of the gun any way you deem fit." The police, however, were one step ahead. They enlisted Jeremiah as a cooperator. They gave him a replica gun and set up a sting operation at the arranged meeting point. Under the watch of covert officers, Sam Gooch arrived, took possession of the replica gun, and was immediately arrested. Sam's interrogation was a study in defiance and caution. He refused to answer most questions, correctly assessing that anything he said would be used against him and his brother. "I frankly do not believe you have my best interest in mind," he told Detective Troy Short. Despite his stonewalling, his actions spoke volumes. He had obtained a new phone and phone number for the trip. He had flown across the country. He had actively attempted to retrieve and destroy the murder weapon. His loyalty to his brother superseded any sense of morality or fear of the law. He knew Mark had allegedly murdered someone, yet he did everything in his power to help him escape justice. Part 7. Justice for Sasha. Mark Gooch's trial began in September 2021. The prosecution laid out the overwhelming evidence: the cell phone data that created an undeniable link between his and Sasha's final journey, the lies told during his interrogation, the evidence of the car detailing, the ballistics from the gun, and the extensive history of his animosity and criminal acts against the Mennonite community. In January 2022, the jury found him guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For his role in the cover-up, Sam Gooch pleaded guilty to hindering prosecution and received 3 years of probation. The verdict brought a legal conclusion to a case that had terrorized a peaceful community. But for the family of Sasha Krause, the pain would never truly end. They lost a daughter, a sister, and a beloved teacher because of one man's deep-seated hatred. The case of Mark Gooch serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear a polite and disciplined facade, and that the most devastating acts of violence are often born from a quiet, patient, and long-nurtured resentment. Sasha Krause's life was one of quiet devotion, and in the end, it was the silent testimony of a digital ghost that brought her murderer to justice. The Shadow in the Desert, an in-depth analysis of the Mark Gooch case. Prologue. The Unseen Fracture. Every world has its own sound. The world of the Lamp and Light Mennonite community in Farmington, New Mexico, was one of quietude. It was the sound of hands at work, of whispered prayers carried on the dry desert breeze, of children's laughter echoing softly across manicured grounds. It was a world insulated by faith, a fortress built not of stone and mortar, but of shared conviction and deliberate separation from the cacophony of modern life. Here, Time was not measured by the frantic ticking of a digital clock, but by the rising and setting of the sun, by the immutable cycle of seasons and worship. Life moved to a rhythm of devotion, a gentle and predictable cadence that promised peace and safety. In this sanctuary of tranquility, Sasha Kraus, at 27, was a beacon of its ideals. She was more than just a Sunday school teacher. She was a keeper of the community's future, nurturing its youngest minds with stories of Scripture and a spirit of unwavering gentleness. Her days were a tapestry of simple, meaningful routines, rising before dawn for prayer, tending to her responsibilities, preparing lessons, and sharing meals with the sisters in her communal home. Her life was a reflection of the community itself, ordered, purposeful, and profoundly peaceful. She was a woman who had chosen a path shielded from the random brutalities of the outside world, a world she and her community knew only through cautionary tales. They believed their faith was their shield. But on the night of January 18th, 2020, a fracture appeared in that shield, unseen and unheard. The evening descended with the crystalline clarity of a high desert winter. Stars glittered like shards of ice in the black velvet sky. For Sasha, the day's work was not quite done. A simple, mundane errand remained a quick trip to the Sunday school building to gather materials for the next day's lesson. It was a walk she had made 1,000 times, a path worn smooth by the footsteps of the faithful. She left the warmth and light of the communal living quarters, her modest dress a familiar silhouette against the pale ground, and stepped into the crisp, cold air. And then she was gone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness that ringed their sacred space. The silence she left behind was different. It was not the peaceful quietude of prayer. It was a void, a question mark hanging in the frigid air. Part 1. A silence in the community. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle, a missed beat in the steady rhythm of communal life. When Sasha failed to return, it was not with a crash of alarm, but with a slow, creeping unease. Punctuality was a tenet of their world, a sign of respect for God and community. For Sasha, it was second nature. Her roommates exchanged glances, a flicker of concern passing between them. Perhaps she'd been delayed, caught in conversation. But as minutes bled into an hour, the excuse wore thin. The unease began to curdle into a palpable fear. The alarm was raised, not with a siren, but with urgent, whispered words that spread from one building to the next like a contagion. Soon, the entire community was awake. Their tranquil world jolted into a state of high alert. Flashlight beams cut sharp, frantic paths through the darkness, sweeping across the familiar grounds of the church, the schoolhouse, the fields. Men and women, their faces etched with a growing dread, called her name. Sasha! Sasha! Their voices, usually reserved for hymns and prayer, now sounded fragile and desperate, echoing into the profound and terrifying silence that answered them. They found her car, parked exactly where she had left it. The materials she had gone to fetch were presumably still inside the schoolhouse. There was no sign of a struggle, no dropped book or scuffed shoe. It was as if the very ground had opened up and consumed her. Sasha Kraus, a woman who lived her life as a testament to the safety found in faith, had been stolen from its very heart. The call to the authorities was a profound admission of failure. To invite the outside world, with its jarring procedures and skeptical eyes, into their sanctuary was a measure of last resort. The arrival of police cars, their flashing lights painting the simple, devout buildings in strobing shades of red and blue, felt like a desecration. A formal investigation was launched, but it was like trying to find a footprint in the wind. There were no witnesses in this isolated community. There was no surveillance footage to scrutinize. There was no obvious motive. Who would target a gentle Mennonite woman, and why? For over a month, the Lamp and Light community was suspended in an agony of not knowing. Life continued. Routines were observed, but a shadow had fallen over them. Every prayer was a plea for Sasha's return, and every passing day was a testament to their growing fear. The investigation stalled. The leads dried up. The case grew cold, becoming a painful, unhealed wound in the heart of a community that had believed itself invulnerable. They prayed for a miracle, but the answer, when it finally came, would be a nightmare delivered from a desolate landscape nearly 300 miles away. Part 2. The Discovery at Sunset Crater. 300 miles to the west, the Earth tells a different story. Sunset Crater National Park in Arizona is a landscape forged by fire and time, a place of stark, violent beauty. Ancient lava flows are frozen in place like black, petrified rivers. The ground is a carpet of volcanic cinders, sharp and dark. It is a world of reds and blacks, a primordial terrain that feels both majestic and deeply unforgiving. On the morning of February 22nd, 2020, this otherworldly landscape was the backdrop for a gruesome discovery. A woman named Cynthia Schultz was enjoying the solitude of the park, collecting firewood for her camp. Her gaze drifted across the terrain, taking in the strange beauty of the cinder cones against the morning sky. And then she saw it, an anomaly, a shape that did not belong to the natural world of rock and twisted juniper. It was a figure, lying prone and unnervingly still. Her first thought was of a hiker, perhaps injured or exhausted. She called out, her voice absorbed by the immense sound-dampening space. "Hello? Are you okay?" The silence that answered was absolute, heavier than any she had ever known. It was the silence of finality. As she cautiously moved closer, the scene resolved into a horrifying tableau. The woman was not sleeping. Her position was unnatural, her stillness complete. Cynthia's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew, with a sudden, ice-cold certainty, that she was looking at the dead. The arrival of law enforcement transformed the tranquil park into a meticulous grid of investigation. The scene that greeted the detectives was somber and chillingly methodical. The victim was dressed in the modest, traditional clothing of a Mennonite, a stark contrast to the wild, untamed landscape around her. Her hands were bound behind her back with the cold, industrial grip of duct tape. A single, precise gunshot wound to the back of her head spoke not of a crime of passion, but of an execution. The body was rigid with advanced rigor mortis, the skin cold to the touch. She had been here for a long time, abandoned to the elements. This was not just a murder. It was a statement. The killer had driven their victim for hours across state lines to this desolate, isolated place. They had bound her and killed her with chilling efficiency. The questions were immediate and overwhelming. Who was she? And who had brought her here to die? The first question was answered relatively quickly. Through forensic comparisons and by cross-referencing national databases of missing persons, investigators were able to put a name to the tragedy. The victim was Sasha Kraus, the gentle Sunday school teacher who had vanished from New Mexico more than a month ago. The mystery of her whereabouts was solved, but it was replaced by a far darker and more complex puzzle. The what and who were now bound to a horrifying why. Why this woman? Why this location? The key to unlocking the entire sinister affair lay with the victim herself in the one piece of modern technology she carried, a simple, basic cell phone. Its battery had long since died, but its digital ghost was about to speak. Part 3. The Digital Ghost and the Airman. In the sterile, climate-controlled world of a digital forensics lab, the hunt began. A victim's cell phone is a modern-day oracle, a silent witness that records the final moments of a life. The detectives on the Mark Gooch case knew that Sasha's phone, though technologically simple, held the key. They recovered it, and specialists began the painstaking process of resurrecting its data, peeling back layers of digital information to reveal the story it had to tell. The first revelation was electrifying. On the night she vanished, her phone had not simply gone dark at the church. It had traveled. As her abductor's vehicle sped west into the night, away from the sanctuary of her community, the phone desperately reached for a signal. Its presence recorded in a series of fleeting, electronic handshakes with a sequence of remote cell towers. Each ping was a breadcrumb, a digital footprint left on the invisible network that blankets the country. For the investigators, this was the first major breakthrough. It created a ghostly map of her final, terrifying journey. Sasha hadn't run away. She had been taken, driven across the vast, empty expanse of the American Southwest. As analysts meticulously traced this path, they initiated a parallel, far more complex search. They cast a wide net, requesting tower dump data, a record of every single device that had connected to those same towers. In the same sequence, during the same late-night window, the task was monumental. Like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. Thousands of data points had to be sorted, cross-referenced, and eliminated. Trucks passing on the highway, locals returning home, travelers on their way to other destinations. But as the analysts filtered the noise, a chilling pattern began to emerge. One signal, and only one, perfectly shadowed Sasha's path. From the moment she was taken in Farmington, through the desolate stretches of highway, to the area near Sunset Crater where her body was found, this one device was her constant, silent companion. It was her killer's digital ghost. The device belonged to a 21-year-old U.S. Air Force airman named Mark Gooch, a mechanic stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Glendale, Arizona. On the surface, the connection was baffling, almost nonsensical. Mark Gooch was the picture of military discipline. He lived a structured life on a secure base, his days governed by the strict protocols of the Air Force. He had no significant criminal record. He was, by all appearances, a model airman. There was no apparent link, no thread of connection whatsoever between him and a devout Mennonite woman from a different state. It seemed impossible. Yet, the digital evidence was immutable. A silent, damning finger pointing directly at him. Their paths, their phones, had been intertwined during the last hours of Sasha's life. Lauren Nagel, the sharp, tenacious lead detective on the case, knew that data did not lie. She packed her bags and traveled to Luke Air Force Base. It was time to come face to face with the man behind the ghost in the machine. Part 4. The Anatomy of a Lie. Interrogating Mark Gooch. The interrogation room at Luke Air Force Base was a study in calculated sterility. The walls were bare, the colors muted, the furniture sparse. It was a space designed to be a vacuum, devoid of distractions, where the only thing of substance was the psychological pressure slowly being applied. Detective Nagel, introducing herself with a different surname to maintain a tactical advantage, understood the geography of this room. She employed the read technique, a method of interrogation that is as much about creating a psychological landscape as it is about asking questions. She sat with no desk or table between herself and Mark, an open and non-confrontational posture that allowed her an unobstructed view of every flicker of his eyes, every twitch of his hands. She placed him in the chair closest to the door, a subtle, non-verbal message that he was not a prisoner, that he was free to leave. It was a strategy designed to lower his defenses and make him talk. Initially, Mark Gooch was the perfect subject. He was the embodiment of the polite, well-mannered soldier. He sat upright, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly. He addressed Detective Nagel as ma'am with unwavering consistency. He spoke clearly and calmly about his duties as a mechanic, the technical specifics of his job, his large family of 6 siblings, and his idyllic-sounding upbringing on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. He was building a character for her, the reliable, all-American boy. He was composed, confident, and utterly believable, but Detective Nagel was not there to talk about his work. She gently steered the conversation toward his life outside the military, toward his personal beliefs and recent activities. And it was here, in this more personal territory, that the first hairline cracks in his meticulously constructed facade began to appear. The first fracture, the religious connection. Nagel asked casually if he attended church. Mark explained that his local church had recently closed due to the coronavirus pandemic, but that, yes, before that, he used to attend quite a bit. It was a plausible, innocuous answer. "What kind of religion did you grow up in?" Nagel inquired, her tone light. The question landed, and for the first time, Mark hesitated. A subtle shift occurred in his demeanor. I grew up in a Christian." "Christian, I guess the religion, is how you call it." "Christianity is how I was raised," he stammered, the words suddenly clumsy and evasive. Nagel pressed gently. "Any specific denomination of Christianity?" "Not really," he said, the answer coming too quickly, too dismissively. It was a lie. A foundational lie. Mark Gooch had not just grown up in Christianity. He had grown up Mennonite, the very same cloistered conservative faith as the murdered woman. For the investigators, this was a bombshell, a shocking and unexpected link that transformed the case. His fumbling, evasive answer was a glaring red flag. His religious background was not just a detail, it was a source of profound discomfort, a secret he was desperate to keep buried. The second fracture, the lie about travel. Nagel let the moment hang in the air for a beat before shifting her line of questioning to his recent whereabouts, the true purpose of her visit. "In that last 6 months," she asked, "have you traveled out of state anywhere?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied without hesitation. When I came down here, I drove my car from Wisconsin down here. A truthful but incomplete answer. Anywhere else? Pretty much all state of Arizona. I try to do as much hiking as possible. The phrase pretty much hung in the sterile air of the room. It was a classic qualifier, a verbal hedge that screams deception to a trained interrogator. It is the language of half-truths, of careful omissions. Mark was not being truthful. He was actively hiding something of immense significance. Nagel, armed with the unassailable cell phone data, already knew he had traveled to New Mexico. She began to slowly tighten the net. She revealed that she was a homicide detective, working on the Sasha Krause case. She watched his reaction closely. He remained outwardly calm. "Any idea now why I want to talk to you at all?" she asked, her voice even. "Probably because I was. Probably traveling up in my exterior, probably," he stammered, the word probably tumbling out 3 times in a few seconds. It was the verbal tick of a man scrambling to construct a lie, his lack of confidence betrayed by his own words. Nagel confronted him, but she did it gently, masterfully. She explained that a license plate reader had picked up his vehicle in the Farmington area on the very day Sasha went missing. She framed it as a routine inquiry, a way to find potential witnesses, a tactic designed to keep him talking, to prevent him from shutting down and lawyering up. Caught in an undeniable contradiction, Mark was forced to concede the trip. "Yes, ma'am," he admitted, his composure still intact but the foundation shaking. "Is there any reason," Nagel asked, her tone betraying no judgment, "why you didn't tell me when I asked you if you've traveled?" "No, ma'am. Sorry. My memory I don't know. It's not what it used to be." "I'm tired today," he said, offering the lamest and most unbelievable of excuses. The polite, formal apology was not a sign of contrition. It was a weapon, a tool to mask the deliberate, calculated deception. Constructing a false narrative, the web of lies. Now forced to account for his presence in Farmington on the day of the murder, Mark began to weave a new, more elaborate web of lies. Each thread was carefully chosen, but the fabric of the story was weak and frayed. The motive for the trip. His story was a cascade of implausible coincidences. He claimed he first drove hours north to Flagstaff, hoping to go skiing. The resort, he claimed, was closed due to coronavirus. This was the first easily disprovable lie. Public records showed the resort didn't close for COVID-19 until March, nearly 2 months later. From there, he claimed, he decided on a whim to drive several more hours east, all the way to Farmington, New Mexico, simply to check out a Mennonite church, because, he said, he missed the social life. The idea of a young man undertaking a spontaneous 600-mile round trip for such a flimsy reason was patently absurd. The church visit. His account of the visit was a masterpiece of vague invention. He claimed he arrived at Sasha's church in the afternoon, saw a sign posted with the service times, and then left because no one was around and he didn't want to bother anyone. He described the church as not really the same as what he was used to, and claimed he felt disappointed with the whole long drive. This was another fatal lie. Detective Nagel had spent countless hours at that very church. She had walked every inch of the grounds. She knew, with absolute certainty, that no such sign existed. The return journey. Mark claimed his friend, a man named Kefley, called him while he was in Farmington to make plans to go hiking the following day, and this call prompted him to immediately turn around and start the long drive back to the base. Once again, the phone records the impartial. Digital witness refuted his story completely. He and Kefley had only exchanged text messages that day. The only person Mark spoke to on the phone was his brother, Sam, and their communication was anything but casual. They spoke 6 separate times, for a combined total of nearly 2.5 hours. This was not a quick chat. It was a series of intense, lengthy conversations on the very day of the murder, a level of communication that was wildly out of the ordinary for them. The timeline. This was where his story would completely disintegrate. He initially claimed that after his brief, disappointing visit to the church, he drove straight back to Luke Air Force Base, arriving around 8 or 9 p.m. that same night. As he told this lie, Nagel observed his mouth movements, the subtle, unconscious tics of deception. He pressed his lips together, a micro-expression known as disappearing lips, often associated with withholding significant information. He was trying to physically hold the truth in, His phone records and, more damningly, the electronic gate logs at the Air Force Base would tell a very, very different story. The confrontation and the collapse. After a strategic break, allowing Mark to sit alone with his lies in the silent room, Detective Nagel returned. The time for gentle prodding was over. It was time to dismantle his story, piece by damning piece. "What if I told you," she began, her voice calm and level, "that the time that you came in the gate that morning was 6:53 in the morning?" The statement landed like a physical blow. The nearly 24-hour trip was now exposed. His 8 p.m. arrival was a lie. His later revised window of 8 or 9 p.m., or 1 or 2 a.m., was also a lie. There was a massive, yawning black hole in his timeline, a gap of many hours that he could not account for. Mark scrambled, his composure finally beginning to crack. "I stopped and slept in the car on the way back," he blurted out, inventing a new detail on the spot, a desperate patch for the gaping hole in his narrative. "I had trouble staying awake. Can't really sleep. It was cold." This was the first time he had mentioned sleeping in his car. It was a lie, born of pure panic. This black hole in his timeline was, of course, the time he spent at Sunset Crater. It was the time he took to bind Sasha Krause, to march her into the volcanic wilderness, to end her life with a single gunshot, and to dispose of her body. Nagel relentlessly applied pressure, revealing that she knew he had returned to the Flagstaff area just a few days later, another trip he had conveniently forgotten to mention. His composure was fraying, the polite soldier persona melting away to reveal the cornered liar beneath. The final phase of the interrogation shifted to the heart of the matter, his feelings about the Mennonite Church. Nagel had observed the flash of raw emotion in his eyes when the topic was first broached. She returned to it now. "Is there something that happened to you in the Mennonite Church that upsets you?" she asked directly. "Not really," he replied, that same qualifying, evasive phrase. But this time, his body betrayed him. He was withholding something immense, his lip movements becoming more pronounced, his jaw tightening, as if he were engaged in a physical struggle to keep his own history from spilling out. The tipping point, the final fatal blow to his deception, came when Nagel revealed her trump card. She had been holding it in reserve, waiting for the perfect moment. "We have a detective talking to your brother Sam right now in Wisconsin," she said, her eyes locked on his. "And what I know a little bit about from what Sam said is it sounds like something's going on here as far as maybe you have hard feelings against the Mennonite Church." The mention of his brother, his closest confidant, being simultaneously interrogated in another state shattered Mark's composure completely. The psychological trap had sprung. The polite facade did not just crack, it crumbled into dust. A new persona emerged, one of cold, defiant anger. "So it sounds like I need to a lawyer," he said, his voice dropping, his tone turning hard and stern. "Because you're trying to pin something on me." He invoked his right to counsel. The interview was over, but it had been a stunning success. Mark Gooch had not confessed, but he had done something just as damning. He had lied about every single critical aspect of his trip. He had revealed a consciousness of guilt so profound, so undeniable, that it was a confession in itself. He had walked into the room a polite airman and walked out a prime murder suspect. Part V, a history of malice. With Mark Gooch now detained, the investigation exploded outwards. Search warrants were executed on his car, his apartment, and his phone. What investigators unearthed was not just evidence of a single crime, but a chilling portrait of a young man with a long, simmering history of resentment, criminality, and a terrifying capacity for patient, calculated revenge. The physical evidence trail. The car. When investigators examined Mark's vehicle, they found it to be immaculately, almost unnaturally clean. A deep dive into his recent transactions uncovered a receipt. On February 23rd, the day after the public announcement that Sasha's body had been found, Mark had paid for an extensive, deep clean detailing of his car. It was a transparent, almost cliché attempt to eradicate any and all forensic evidence, hair, fibers, blood, DNA. But no cleaning is ever perfect. Despite his efforts, crime scene technicians found suspicious stains that warranted further testing, and a pair of black nitrile gloves tucked away the tools of a man who planned not to leave a trace. The phone. His cell phone, the very device that had led them to him. Now, became a roadmap of his guilt. Forensics experts recovered a shocking amount of recently deleted data. They found that in the early morning hours of January 19th, immediately upon his return from his murderous trip to New Mexico, he had performed a targeted deletion of files and documents from his Google account. He had also deleted a series of text messages with his brother, Sam. The content of those texts was damning. They discussed the need to get his car's interior cleaned really well. He was documenting his own cover-up. The gun. The most crucial piece of physical evidence was the murder weapon. Through interviews with Mark's friends on the base, investigators learned from a man named Kemper Kepley that Mark owned a handgun. This was a violation of base policy, but that was the least of his concerns. Mark, feeling the heat of the investigation, had recently given the gun to another friend, asking him to store it off base. Detectives quickly tracked down this friend and recovered the weapon. Ballistics tests confirmed their worst fears. The gun was the same caliber as the bullet that had been fired into the back of Sasha Krause's head. Unearthing a buried past. As the physical evidence mounted, Detective Nagel began a deep dive into Mark's past, traveling to his hometown in Wisconsin. She discovered that his clean criminal record was a complete fiction. The polite, disciplined airman he pretended to be was a character he had invented. The Mennonite community he had left behind remembered him not as a quiet young man, but as a vengeful, dishonest, and deeply troubled figure. A pattern of theft and revenge. His former pastor, James Luke Martin, spoke with Nagel, his voice heavy with a grim lack of surprise. He told her that no one in the community was shocked to learn of Mark's arrest for such a heinous crime. He had a well-known reputation for stealing and for taking disproportionate revenge on anyone who crossed him. When the church elders had confronted him about a series of robberies, his parents had furiously defended him. They refused to believe their son was capable of such acts. And in a dramatic split, they pulled their entire family from the church, blaming the community for being too critical and persecuting their son. Calculated, cruel sabotage. The pattern continued after his family moved to Pennsylvania. Once again, Mark was accused of stealing money from members of the local Mennonite community. And shortly after these accusations were made, every single one of his accusers discovered that their cars had mysteriously and catastrophically broken down. A mechanic found the cause. Sand had been meticulously poured into the oil pans of their engines, an act of sabotage designed to cause maximum, irreparable damage. It was a cold, vindictive act that required mechanical knowledge and a chillingly patient mindset. While they couldn't prove it was Mark, everyone knew who was responsible. The undeniable proof. The most stunning revelation came from the investigation into the robbery of the Martin family's general store back in Wisconsin. At the time, Mark was the primary suspect, but no charges were ever filed because the security system's memory card had been cleverly stolen, erasing any visual proof. In an incredible twist of fate, a moment of pure investigative gold, detectives found the stolen security footage from that very robbery on Mark's own phone. He had kept a trophy of his crime. The footage showed a man of his exact height and build ransacking the store. He had outsmarted them then, but his own arrogance had preserved the evidence that would now bury him. Interviews with former associates, like a young man named Jared Ulrich, cemented this portrait. Jared confessed to having been Mark's partner in crime, committing robberies with him. He described in detail how Mark would expertly and sadistically frame other innocent people in the community for the crimes they had committed together. The text messages recovered from Mark's phone between him and his brother Sam about remotely wiping Jared's phone and later, Mark's own phone after he became a suspect showed a sophisticated, almost professional understanding of how to cover his digital tracks. The motive solidifies into a horrifying truth. The investigation had now unearthed a clear, chilling, and undeniable motive. This was not a random act of violence. It was not a robbery gone wrong. It was the culmination of years of festering, violent hatred. Mark Gooch harbored a deep-seated, pathological grudge against the Mennonite community, the world that had raised him and, in his twisted view, had rejected him. Text messages between Mark and his brothers laid his contempt bare. In one exchange, their brother Jacob, a Virginia state trooper, mentioned giving 2 Mennonites a speeding ticket. Mark and Sam reacted with gleeful, vicious joy. Mark texted that he hoped Jacob treated the Mennonites like S. Sam, in his own message, referred to them as cultists. Most damningly, another text from Mark to Sam revealed that he had been conducting surveillance on Mennonite communities in Arizona. The word choice was deliberate and terrifying. He wasn't observing, he was stalking, he was hunting. On January 18, 2020, he had not gone to Farmington on a whim. He had gone with a singular, malevolent purpose: to find a victim. He wanted to hurt the community in the most profound way imaginable, by stealing one of their own. He wanted to prove that he was smarter than them, that their faith could not protect them from him. Tragically, Sasha Krause, in the wrong place at the very worst time, became the symbol for all of his accumulated hate. She became the target for years of his dark and violent resentment. He felt he was smarter than everyone, smarter than the church elders, smarter than his victims, and ultimately, smarter than the police. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Part 6, A Brother's Complicity. The investigation took another dramatic and disturbing turn when it became terrifyingly clear that Mark was not acting alone in his desperate attempt to cover up his crime. His brother, Sam Gooch, the one he described as his closest confidant, the one he had spent hours on the phone with on the very day of the murder, transitioned from a passive listener to an active, willing accomplice. In the days following Mark's arrest, a series of frantic, coded communications began between Sam in Wisconsin and Mark's friends in Arizona. Sam, orchestrating the effort from afar, learned the status of the murder weapon. He contacted Jeremiah Levesque, the young man who was storing Mark's gun, and made immediate, urgent plans to travel from Wisconsin to Arizona. His mission had one singular, criminal goal: to get his hands on the gun and dispose of it before the police could perform the ballistic tests that would definitively link it to Sasha's murder. The police, however, were already listening. They had anticipated this exact move. In a recorded phone call that would seal Sam's fate, he instructed Jeremiah, "Considering what's going on, if you're comfortable, I would say get rid of the gun any way you deem fit." It was an unambiguous order to destroy evidence in a capital murder case. But the police were one step ahead. They had already reached Jeremiah, and, facing the gravity of the situation, he had agreed to cooperate. The stage was set for a sting operation. Detectives gave Jeremiah a replica gun, visually identical to Mark's. A meeting point was arranged. On the designated day, the area was swarming with covert officers, hidden in plain sight, their eyes all trained on one spot, waiting. Under the watchful gaze of the hidden surveillance teams, Sam Gooch arrived, just as planned. The exchange was quick. He took possession of the replica gun from Jeremiah, his face a mask of grim determination. The moment the package was in his hands, the trap sprung. Unmarked vehicles descended, and officers swarmed him. Sam Gooch was arrested, caught red-handed in a brazen attempt to obstruct justice. His interrogation was a study in stark contrast to his brother's. Where Mark had been a fountain of lies and misdirection, Sam was a wall of stoic, cautious defiance. He understood the legal peril he was in. He refused to answer most questions, correctly and cynically assessing that the detectives were not on his side. "I frankly do not believe you have my best interest in mind," he told Detective Troy Short, his voice flat and emotionless. Despite his stonewalling, his actions had spoken far louder than any words ever could. He had secretly obtained a new phone with a new, untraceable number specifically for this trip. He had flown halfway across the country under a cloak of secrecy. He had actively and knowingly attempted to retrieve and destroy the primary piece of evidence in his brother's murder case. His loyalty to his brother was absolute, superseding any sense of morality, any concept of right and wrong, and any fear of the law. He knew, without a doubt, that Mark had allegedly murdered someone, and yet he did everything in his power to help him escape justice. The bond between the two brothers, forged in a shared resentment, was now a criminal conspiracy. Part 7, Justice for Sasha. The trial of Mark Gooch began in September 2021. The courtroom was a theater of quiet, solemn tension. On one side sat Mark, his face a passive, unreadable mask, the polite airman persona reassembled for the jury. On the other side sat the family of Sasha Krause, their faces a portrait of grief, enduring the horrific details of their daughter's final hours. The prosecution, led by the Coconino County Attorney's Office, methodically constructed an unassailable case, laying out the overwhelming mountain of evidence piece by damning piece. They presented the cell phone data, translating the cold, hard pings into a vivid, terrifying narrative of abduction and a long, final journey into darkness. They played the tapes of Mark's interrogation, allowing the jury to hear the cascade of lies, the weak excuses, and the palpable consciousness of guilt in his own voice. They presented the evidence of the car detailing, the deleted text messages, and the ballistics from the gun that unequivocally tied his weapon to the murder. And then, they took the jury on a journey into Mark's past, revealing the extensive, chilling history of his animosity and his escalating criminal acts against the Mennonite community. They painted a portrait not of a young man who made one terrible mistake, but of a predator who had been honing his skills for years, fueled by a deep-seated, violent hatred. In January 2022, after deliberating, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Mark Gooch guilty on all counts: kidnapping, theft, and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law: life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would die behind bars. For his role in the brazen cover-up, his brother, Sam Gooch, pleaded guilty to hindering prosecution. He received 3 years of probation, a sentence that many felt was a small price to pay for, attempting to help a murderer escape justice. The verdicts brought a legal conclusion to a case that had sent shockwaves of terror through a peaceful, devout community. Justice, in the cold, procedural sense of the word, had been served. But for the family and friends of Sasha Kraus, the pain would be a life sentence of its own. They lost a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a beloved teacher, not to a random act of violence, but to one man's deep-seated, poisonous hatred. The case of Mark Gooch serves as a chilling and enduring reminder that the most monstrous evil can wear a polite, disciplined, and utterly ordinary facade. It is a testament to the fact that the most devastating acts of violence are often not born in a flash of rage, but are nurtured slowly in the quiet, dark corners of a resentful heart. Sasha Kraus's life was one of quiet devotion and unwavering faith, and in the end, it was the silent, unwavering testimony of a digital ghost that brought her cold-blooded killer to justice. The shadow in the desert had been caught, but the darkness it cast would linger forever. The Shadow in the Desert, a psychological autopsy of Mark Gooch. Prologue. The genesis of a grievance. To understand the crime, one must first understand the fracture. Every world possesses a unique psychological resonance. For the Lamp and Light Mennonite community in Farmington, New Mexico, that resonance was one of profound quietude, an external manifestation of an internal state of order and control. This was not merely a quiet place. It was a psychological fortress, constructed not of stone, but of shared conviction, ritual, and a deliberate, structured separation from the chaotic stimuli of the outside world. Here, life was governed by an immutable rhythm: prayer, work, community, a predictable cadence designed to inoculate its members against the existential anxieties that plagued modern society. It was an environment that promised not just physical safety, but psychological certainty. Within this sanctuary, Sasha Kraus, at 27, was the embodiment of its highest ideals. Her role as a Sunday school teacher was not merely a job, it was a sacred trust. She was a nurturer of the community's collective psyche, tasked with instilling its foundational beliefs in the next generation. Her existence was a tapestry of simple, meaningful routines that reinforced her identity and place within the group. She was, in every sense, a true believer, a woman who had fully integrated the community's values into her own personality structure. Her faith was her shield, a psychological armor she believed to be impenetrable. But on the night of January 18, 2020, a predator, whose own psychological armor was forged from entirely different materials, grievance, resentment, and a profound sense of entitlement, breached the fortress. The act itself was a violation of the community's core psychological contract. When Sasha Kraus stepped out for a simple errand, a routine act embedded in a lifetime of safety, she stepped into a narrative that was not her own. She was not seen by her attacker as Sasha Kraus, the individual. She was seen as a symbol, an avatar for a world that the predator felt had wronged him. Her disappearance was not a simple act of violence. It was a targeted psychological assault on the entire community. The void she left behind was not just one of physical absence, but of shattered certainty. The silence that followed was the sound of a foundational belief system cracking under the weight of a brutal, incomprehensible intrusion. The question that hung in the frigid air was not just, "Where is Sasha?" but How could this happen here? It was a question that struck at the very heart of their identity and their perceived immunity from the darkness they had so carefully walled out. Part 1. A Silence in the Community. The Psychology of the Victim and the Void. The initial response to Sasha's absence is a case study in the disruption of a communal psyche. In a world built on punctuality and predictability, her failure to return was not just a cause for concern, it was a cognitive dissonance. The slow creeping unease that spread through the community was the dawning awareness that their predictive models of the world had failed. This was an anomaly, an event that did not compute within their rigid framework of expectation. The mobilization of the community reveals their deeply interconnected nature. The alarm, spreading through urgent whispers rather than sirens, speaks to a collective consciousness. Their frantic search was not just for a missing person, but for a missing piece of themselves. The discovery of her car, untouched, and the absence of any sign of struggle amplified the psychological terror. This was not a crime of passion or a chaotic struggle. The clean, seamless nature of the abduction suggested a predator who was controlled, methodical, and efficient. The very lack of evidence was, in itself, a terrifying piece of evidence. It suggested an offender who was forensically aware and psychologically prepared. Sasha Kraus had not been taken in a moment of random opportunity. She had been hunted. The decision to call the authorities represents a significant psychological threshold for a community like Lamp and Light. It is a profound admission that their internal systems of control and safety have failed. To invite the secular external world of law enforcement into their sanctuary is to acknowledge their vulnerability. The flashing lights of the police cars are not just illuminating the buildings, they are exposing the cracks in the community's psychological fortress. The investigation's immediate stall, the lack of witnesses or motives, deepened the communal trauma. The offender had committed a psychologically perfect crime in its initial stages, leaving behind a vacuum of information that was quickly filled with fear, speculation, and a corrosive sense of helplessness. For over a month, the community existed in a state of suspended agony, a collective trauma response characterized by hypervigilance and a loss of the foundational safety they had once taken for granted. They were living inside the psychological wound, inflicted by an unknown, unseen enemy. Part 2. The Discovery at Sunset Crater. The Offender's Post. Offense Behavior. The choice of disposal site for a victim's body is a profoundly revealing act, offering a direct window into the offender's psychology. 300 miles from the abduction site, Sunset Crater National Park is a landscape of primordial violence, a world of black volcanic cinders and frozen lava flows. It is a place that feels alien, hostile, and deeply indifferent to human life. The selection of this location was not accidental. It was a psychologically significant choice. From a criminal psychology perspective, there are two primary modes of body disposal: concealment and dumping. Concealment is driven by a fear of discovery and a desire to destroy evidence. Dumping, in contrast, often reflects a different set of motivations: arrogance, contempt for the victim, and a desire to psychologically distance oneself from the act. Mark Gooch did not meticulously bury or hide Sasha's body. He left her on the surface, exposed to the elements, in a place of stark, unforgiving desolation. This act of dumping suggests several key psychological traits: dehumanization and contempt. By leaving her in such a desolate, non-human landscape, the killer completes the process of dehumanization that began at the moment of abduction. She is no longer a person. She is an object to be discarded. The act is a final expression of his contempt, not just for her, but for everything she represented. Geographic and psychological distancing. The 300-mile journey served a dual purpose. Geographically, it was intended to sever the link between the victim and the crime scene, a common tactic to confuse and delay investigation. Psychologically, it allowed the offender to create a vast mental distance between his normal life and his monstrous act. He could return to his structured existence at Luke Air Force Base, leaving the bad part of himself hundreds of miles away in the volcanic wasteland. Arrogance and a sense of impunity. To leave a body in a national park, a place frequented by the public, is an act of profound arrogance. It suggests an offender who feels intellectually superior to law enforcement. He believes the geographic distance is enough to protect him, that the connection will never be made. He is confident in his ability to have committed the perfect crime. The state of the body, hands bound with duct tape, A single execution-style gunshot to the head speaks to a need for absolute control. This was not a chaotic, frenzied attack. The binding of the hands is symbolic of rendering the victim completely powerless. The single, precise shot is the act of a methodical killer who is focused on the clean, efficient completion of his task. This was not about rage in the moment. It was about the cold, calculated extermination of a symbol. When Cynthia Schultz discovered the body, she did not just stumble upon a crime scene. She stumbled upon the final, contemptuous statement of a deeply disturbed individual. Part 3. The Digital Ghost and the Airman. The Paradox of the Meticulous Predator. The Digital Forensics Lab is the modern battleground between the criminal and the investigator. In the case of Mark Gooch, the analysis of Sasha Krause's cell phone data reveals the central paradox of his criminal psychology. He was both meticulously careful and catastrophically careless. A psychologically driven offender, particularly one exhibiting psychopathic traits, often engages in a high degree of planning. The crime is not an impulsive act, but a project, a fantasy to be enacted. Gooch's journey from Arizona to New Mexico, his targeting of a specific community, and the clean nature of the abduction all point to significant premeditation. He was not an amateur. He was a predator who had likely rehearsed this scenario in his mind countless times. The analysis of the cell tower data provided the first glimpse into this meticulous planning. The long, deliberate journey was a calculated part of his plan to create distance. However, his failure to account for the digital footprint of both his and his victims' phones represents a fatal cognitive error, one that is common among offenders with strong narcissistic traits. This paradox can be explained by several psychological factors. Narcissistic grandiosity. Gooch likely possessed a grandiose sense of his own intelligence and capabilities. He believed he had planned the perfect crime. This arrogance led to a critical blind spot. He focused on the physical aspects of the crime, the abduction, the transportation, the murder, the disposal, while underestimating the invisible, digital world. He believed he was smarter than the technology that would ultimately betray him. Cognitive tunnel vision. During the commission of a crime, an offender can experience a form of cognitive tunnel vision. Their mental energy is so focused on the execution of the primary act that they fail to consider ancillary details. Gooch was focused on the victim, on the control, on the fulfillment of his violent fantasy. The continuous pinging of cell towers was likely a detail that simply did not register as a significant threat in his heightened state of arousal. The illusion of control. For an individual like Gooch, the entire crime is an exercise in control. The digital world, however, is a system that operates outside of his direct control. His belief in his own superiority gave him an illusion of total control, blinding him to the fact that he was moving through a digital landscape that was meticulously recording his every move. The discovery that a single device belonging to a U.S. airman had perfectly shadowed Sasha's path was the moment the predator's cloak of invisibility was ripped away. Lauren Nagel's journey to Luke Air Force Base was not just a trip to interview a person of interest. It was a journey to confront a man who believed he was a ghost, a man who was about to discover that in the modern world, no one is invisible. Part 4. The Anatomy of a Lie. A psychological dissection of the interrogation. The interrogation of Mark Gooch is a masterclass in observing the psychological constructs of a deceptive and disordered personality. The sterile room at Luke Air Force Base became a laboratory, and Detective Nagel, a clinical observer, meticulously peeled back the layers of his performance to reveal the roiling pathology beneath. Layer 1. The Performance of Normalcy. Impression Management. Gooch's initial presentation was a carefully calibrated performance. His upright posture, his calm demeanor, and his consistent use of